Alrighty, everybody. Welcome back to our stage. We hope that you enjoyed your lunch break and that you learned a lot about what you need to do to protect your data, as well as maybe you were able to visit some of the exhibitor booths, connect with some attendees, really get some grassroots conversations going about how do you move forward, who can help you, and who are your potential partners for the future. So, under the SBIR and STTR programs, agencies either fund via a contract or a grant. And there are some specific requirements and differences between those two vehicles. Our next panel is going to actually highlight some of these differences, why they're important, and what you should know before choosing your path forward. So this panel, granting versus contracting, what are the differences and why do they matter? Going to be moderated by Myrriah Tomar, Director of the Office of Science and Technology at the New Mexico Economic Development Department, or NMEDD. So Myrriah completed her PhD in molecular biology at the University of Colorado and Schultz Medical School, and her BS in biochemistry from the University of New Mexico. Shortly after graduating with her PhD, Myrriah worked with the startup company SafeWhite Inc., as an associate scientist serving to transition their core technology into a product. She was awarded a postdoctoral fellowship by Ohio State University for her research on obesity-induced pancreatic cancer. She's going to be joined by panelists Robin Cantor, Debra Tovar, Dr. Elizabeth Mirowski, and Jason Schroepfer. Myrriah, the floor is now yours. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Del, and thank you each of you for being here today. I think we have a really exciting panel that will talk about granting and contracting. Before I get started and ask our panelists to introduce themselves, I just want to give you a little bit more background about what we do at the Economic Development Department, and if you're a science and tech company, how we can help you identify resources. So as Del mentioned, I run the Office of Science and Technology, and we work very closely with the Arrowhead Center and the NM-FAST program there. And so as they help you to develop your SBIR, STTR, and if you're awarded a grant, what the state can do is match these grants. So it's not a one-to-one match, but it's still a pretty good amount of funding. So for phase 1 SBIR, STTRs, the New Mexico Economic Development can match it up to, for phase 1, $25,000, or for a phase 2, up to $100,000. So this is for non-research and development related activities. So this can be for things related to intellectual property, identifying, doing customer discovery, identifying partners, and that's just a few things to name. But if you have any questions, I would ask you to reach out to me or send me an email. But without further ado, I will get back to our panel today, which is granting versus contracting. And so I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, give a little bit of a description of what they do, and also kind of identify what you think attendees should gain most out of this panel. So I will start with the person I see first on my screen, and that is Jason Schroepfer. He's with the Department of the Navy.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Schroepfer. I'm the Business and Financial Manager for Naval Sea Systems Command SBIR STTR program. That is the second largest SBIR and STTR program in the Navy. NavAir is our counterpart, and they're slightly larger than us one based on the amount of money that we have to operate with every year. In my current capacity, I oversee all of the funding and contracts management for the server program for NAVSEA. That entails roughly 150 or so active small business contracts every year. And we have an operating budget of in the neighborhood of $150 million annually. So we get quite a bit of volume going through our office, quite a bit of traffic. And I've been doing this for about 8 years now. Prior to that, I was still involved in the SBIR program, but I was with a specific PEO as their server coordinator. And at NAVC, we only offer contracts. We do not do grants. So one or two of the other panelists can speak more clearly to that. I guess the key takeaways for today, from my perspective at least, is to understand the key difference between contracting and granting, and how to set yourself up to succeed in either realm, whichever way you decide to participate, and also to find a way to reach out to get the information that you do need in order to make that decision.
Thanks, Jason. Our next panelist is Dr. Ela Marowski.
Hi, thanks for having me here. I just want to say that my dog may bark, so please forgive me in advance of that. So I'm a program director at the National Science Foundation. I've been there since May of this year, onboarded during COVID. I am the program director for the Advanced Manufacturing and Mobility portfolios at the National Science Foundation's SBIR program. Prior to that, I actually had significant experience in the SBIR program, working for a variety of small businesses. I had a success prior to that where I took a tech transfer opportunity and I brought it into a contract manufacturing company, spun it out into its own division, and then I took it into a standalone company, generating about $1.5 million of revenue in 3 years, and then $3 million of funds, non-dilutive funds brought into the company. So I have expertise on the side of the entrepreneurial aspect. I got a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Colorado, and I did a postdoc at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So at our program, typically all of our program directors have some technical and entrepreneurial experience or commercial experience to be able to really bridge the gap and help companies out there sort of navigate our programs and bring great scientific discoveries to the market. And then what I would like you to take away from this is just kind of get a flavor of what the SBIR program is about if you don't already know about it, and that could help you sort of navigate the websites once you determine, which potential avenue is best for you in terms of, whether it's Department of Energy, Department of Defense, National Science Foundation. There's a lot of different opportunities out there. And so being able to navigate the space through the website and understanding the process a little better is what I'm hoping you will get out of this.
Great, thank you so much. We'll then go on to our next panelist, Dr. Robin Cantor.
Yeah, hello, thanks for this opportunity to be on the panel today. My name's Robin Cantor. I'm president of Star Cryo Electronics. We're a small company in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We've been in business almost 22 years, and our main focus is in superconducting electronics. So this includes sensors and detectors for a fairly broad range of applications, ranging from basic research to non-destructive testing of materials, geophysical exploration, and biomedical imaging applications. Our customer base is worldwide, and we started out with a fairly limited product palette, and through the SBIR STTR program, we were able to target some new technologies and further develop our core technologies and the business, so that now we not only provide components but also turnkey systems. So the SBIR program has had a tremendous impact on our business development. As far as the sessions today, I suspect there may be a number of people who are new to the SBIR program, and I know it can appear to be fairly daunting if you're just getting started. So hopefully today's session will help people get a little bit more insight into the program and simplify the procedure a little bit to help them make their first applications.
Thank you, Robin. And our next panelist, if you could introduce yourself, it's Debra Tovar. Debra, can you hear me? So Debra is with the Defense Contract Audit Agency.
Yes, I'm Debra Tovar. I'm a supervisory auditor from DCAA.
Okay, it
Yes.
seems we might be having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we can just jump right into the panel.
Are you guys hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
There seems to be a little bit of a delay between when Debra can hear us and when she can talk there.
Okay. Well, and if any of you in the audience have any questions, please feel free to add those into the chat box, and we will get to those before the end of today's panel. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So, you know, we had the opportunity to talk to our panelists just before this event, maybe a couple weeks ago. And one of the things that came up is how much of a difference there can be between grants and contracts and how they're handled across different funding opportunities. So what do each of you think is one facet that defines a grant versus a contract in your eyes based on your experience? Whether this be the focus of the grant or contract and how payments are done. So I'll let Jason start. Jason, I think you're muted.
You're right, I am. Thanks. I think the key difference from my understanding of both vehicles is that the contracting agencies tend to be a little more focused in their solicitations. Typically, we will speak with our technical community to find out what issues they're having and where they would like industry to jump in and help us. And we'll write our solicitations kind of focused on that area. And then when we publish them in the broad agency announcement, 3 times every year, they're very specific to a problem that we need help with. And I think on the granting side, it's a little more open. It allows the vendors and performers a lot more latitude to kind of come up with their own solutions and answer a broader array of issues. Where on the contract side, especially with my organization, we'll tell you where we need the help, and then we'll review proposals specifically with that in mind of trying to solve that one individual problem.
Ella, can you?
Sure. So to my understanding, the SBIR program has contracts and grants. NSF actually is an entity that is a granting entity, along with, I believe, DOE has SBIR, that's our grants, USDA, and then recently the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration also has SBIR grants. The big difference, at least at NSF, is we have over 27 different what we call portfolios with different topics ranging from, say, pharmaceutical technologies, life sciences, through advanced manufacturing, robotics, wireless technologies, quantum computing. Our mandate is to really just have a really broad scope of what technologies we would fund. The idea is that perhaps there are golden nuggets out there of technology that are just new and exciting. Where our program during phase 1 has a boot camp aspect to it, and the idea for that is it teaches you how to do customer discovery, which means that you may have this really cool, awesome technology, but you're not quite sure where it would fit in the market. And so that customer discovery allows you to identify where that market fit is. And so because the program's a grant and it's not as structured, it's possible to actually pivot and change your milestones to meet what you've discovered through having conversations with industry stakeholders. And so So that's one of the big differences, I think, between the contracts and grants is it's fairly open like that. And with regards to distribution of funds, you know, we have a drawdown type program where basically at the beginning of a phase one, you know, you have $256,000 as a maximum amount that you can be awarded, and you pretty much have access to that except for $25,000 right away. So we have a lot of startups. I think our percentages are about like over in the high 80s are, you know, startups that have, you know, 3 or fewer or 5 or fewer employees. They've been in business for 3 years or less. They're not revenue generating for the most part. So they don't really have any kind of money to be able to put up front to then be paid back. So that's why we have a drawdown type of payment scheme for us. And so that's another one of the other big differences. We don't require as much reporting. We require in the phase one a final report. And then after that final report is done and is okayed by the program director, that's when we release the last $25,000. So.
Very interesting. So Robin, I mean, from the perspective of the business, have you worked with both the grants and contracts, and in your eyes, kind of what defines one versus the other, and why would a business choose one avenue of funding over another? Can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, there is one, I think, really big difference from my perspective, and that is the way the funds are dispersed. And Ella was describing that. The agencies that offer grants, in that case, you're able to draw down the funds as you need them. And so NSF, DOE, NIH, we've had SBIR grants from those agencies, but other agencies, and one that I'm aware of is NASA, those SBIR awards typically are contracts. So in that case, there's a payment schedule set up in the actual contract. It may be every 3 months you file a report. That report is then accepted, and then they make payment. On a phase one, it may not be quite as difficult, but we've had NASA phase twos, for example, where we're buying a lot of components, materials, equipment, and if you realistically, you don't actually receive the money for 4 months because there's 30 days after you submit the report that they have to make payment. So that means you have to carry all of the expenses on your own books for up to 4 months before you get the money to cover it. With a grant, it's a completely different situation. There, you can draw down the funds as you're expending them. So for small companies, that's really the ideal situation. It's a big challenge to manage cash flow. In our case, we do have a fair amount of commercial sales. 50% of our business on average is commercial. So we do have a revenue stream, but nevertheless, if we have to cover all of the project costs up front, it's really a challenge, especially if we're acquiring expensive components or equipment. It's really difficult. So that's a key difference that you need to be aware of in planning for the project. I mean, you can structure the milestones in the project and the acquisitions to work around the payment schedule to the extent you can. That's really the only way you can do it if you're looking at a contract instead of a grant.
Okay, great point, Robin. And speaking of payment distribution and kind of how it's dealt with, whether you're getting a grant or you're contracting, I was wondering, Jason, if you could talk a little bit more about how payments are handled between a contracting agency. We heard a little bit about how the payments are set up through the granting agencies, but is this based on a milestone? Can you just kind of give us an overview of how that works from the contracting perspective?
Sure, and I think Robin touched on it pretty well there. It depends on the phase of the program. Like for us, for example, phase ones, the payments are tied to deliverables. So 2 weeks after a contract is initiated, the company is asked to provide like a project plan kickoff brief. And as soon as that's submitted, then we'll authorize 50% of the payment. And then after that, it's based on just a draft final report, and then at the end of the contract, a final report. So payments are tied to deliverables in phase 1. On phase 2, it's a little more flexible. We typically award either a 2-year base contract valued at around $1 million, or we'll do a 1-year base at about $500,000 or $600,000 with 2 options that we could exercise. And typically, we'll try to fund those all the way up to the ceiling if we can, if we have the budget to support it. And then it's just based on the company working with the technical point of contact on whatever the effort happens to be. If there's some long lead time purchases that they need to make up front, they'll be able to do that. Otherwise, it's just whatever their burn rate is for labor and materials and travel. And then they submit a monthly invoice that we authorize and then pay.
So Ella, one question I have about kind of the payment structure. Is it based, I think you touched on this a little bit, based on milestones, and are phase 1 and phase 2 recipients kind of treated the same in terms of having to meeting these performance requirements?
So basically we've had companies that have started drawing down most of the money that was available to start with. So we don't actually look at milestones and then pay off that. It's basically as they need it to execute. And so many would actually do that, where they would basically take whatever money they think they would need. Sometimes they take half of it, and sometimes they take another half. Sometimes there's risk in that if you don't actually complete the project, or if you complete the project and you show in the budget that you actually used less money, that's when we have to actually have a discussion. So basically in those situations, then the program director talks with the PIs and we determine, is there some other tasks that those could be used that are going to be relevant to the project, milestones. If not, and there really is nothing left to do, then in those cases, the coming years, we're actually going to be requesting those funds back. So we do require a certified time tracking and an accounting system. So that's one of the big things that we absolutely mandate. You can't do any kind of time tracking on Excel, things like that. As a new startup, that tends to be what people want to do, but in order for us to be able to audit. So for phase 2, and then there is an audit, and we do a very stringent sort of look at the financials of a company going into phase 2. So I did notice somebody had a question in the chat box that I thought would be interesting to answer, but it looks like it got answered. So,
could I just jump in for 1 second? I think, there are several different agencies that sponsor SBIR awards, and for the ones that offer grants where you can draw down the funds, I'm seeing very different requirements from agency to agency. As far as guidelines concerning the drawdowns. In some cases, it sounds like you can draw maybe half of, or Ella, you were saying half of the total grant amount in one go. And other agencies are very specific. Whenever you draw down funds, you have to expend those funds within, I think, 3 days is the typical rule. So you have to be very careful about the timing between when the funds are expended versus when the funds are actually drawn down. And that may depend on the agency. So just have to be a little careful about that.
Yeah, and so, and I mean, the contract, I was just going to say the contracts versus the grants part, it's really all about that, there's federal regulations around a contract, and that there's a deliverable to the government there. And so in the grants, the government is not receiving any product. It's for the public purpose and benefit is what we're funding in general. So there isn't really a specific identifiable deliverable. And so if you're looking to apply to the programs, one way is to look and see, well, what is the DoD looking for? What do they want? Do they want a specific widget or item or technology? And then you fit that. And for NSF, that's not the case. So, and even NIH has just the omnibus, which is please just propose what you think is needed out there and what your technology is and how it would fit to solve a problem that's in the market that we're unaware of. And so those typically are the grants because of that. And again, we always say NSF's not a customer. There's no deliverable to us besides, a final report. But that's mostly just for our administrative processes. So, and then one other thing with NSF is we changed phase 1. Phase 2 is now a cooperative agreement rather than a grant. And the difference is there is much more oversight. Like there is a lot more oversight in a cooperative agreement where the grants are typically very much the government is completely hands off, and it's not making any milestones more concrete. It's just that there is this ability for the program director to represent the government and have a little more oversight through the 2 years that those grants or cooperative agreements are in place.
Yeah, and so the next thing I wanted to kind of go into was, and I think you touched on this a little bit, Ella, is that, one of the large differences between contracting and grant agencies is how the topics are arranged and the customer focus. So with contracting agencies, your innovation is focused to provide a solution for a particular problem, and your customer is already built in with the agency themselves. And it seems to be a little bit more broad with the granting agencies, which I think is also a good thing. But what impacts do each of you think has on these awardees? And for Robin, do you treat the awards differently based on these facets?
Based on which facets? I'm sorry.
On the innovation being focused to provide a solution or a problem versus and already having a customer built in versus having a more broad call, I guess, in grants.
Well, let's see. I don't know that that's really come up for us in the past. I mean, we're looking mostly at solicitations from DOE, NIH, NASA, NSF, and we're just looking for areas where the agencies are looking for technology developments where we have some core expertise. So that's really the main thing we're looking at is where we can contribute our core expertise to solve a problem that's been presented in the solicitation, as well as how that might expand our business. So the two kind of go hand in hand. We have to have something that we can offer, but also it needs to complement our business growth, business plans. So those are the factors that we're looking at.
Okay. I think one of the other questions that I wanted to ask you all are, are there any hidden restrictions that exist for granting or contracting that that you wish would disappear? We can start with you, Jason. Is there anything that you think?
I'm gonna say I think Robin should answer that because we don't. I think Jason and I don't really have a choice. So.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, the reporting requirements are always a little bit of a challenge. At least they were initially, but then I think once you get some experience in how to record data as you're going through the project, so you have it ready to compile into report, not just wait till the very last moment and try to remember what you did several months ago. But if you keep a running database of results, test data, things that you're working on as you're going along, that it's a lot easier to generate the reports towards the end. Some cases we worked with collaborators, and making sure that they stick to the timetable has been a little bit of a challenge, especially as far as the reporting is concerned. Yeah, I mean, I understand there's a need for the reporting that has to be there. That's not something that can go away completely. We also have to prepare the financial reports. Sometimes it's not completely clear how those are supposed to be prepared, and so that can be a little bit confusing. So I don't know if there were a way to streamline that reporting process. Sometimes it's not clear if the information is actually being used. So if I submit a report, I might get an acknowledgement a couple of months later that it's been received and entered. So it makes me wonder, how much value that reporting information is if it's not being processed timely. But yeah, so those are a couple things that are just things that you have to do along with the grant program.
So, okay, granting and contracting agencies also differ in how flexible they are for awardees between scope changes, category overages, and allowing for missing sections or late submissions. Granting agencies typically are more open to working with potential awardees. Do each of you think this is true? And the second part of this question is, what is one thing you have run up against that really breaks the mold?
I think in this area, the contracting agencies may be kind of viewed as the bad guy, because we are stricter when it comes to following the solicitation, following the rules, not exceeding page counts, simple things like that. Like I said earlier, it's very specific as far as the work that we're looking for the proposal to cover. And just due to the nature of the program and how big it is, we're pretty tight when it comes to following those guidelines. Like, for example, if somebody submits a proposal that's a half a page outside of what the instructions told them that they could submit, then we won't even look at it. It won't even get to our evaluators to see. So from that perspective, I know that we're pretty strict on it, and I think Ella will probably say the opposite. I think they're a little more open, so I'll let her speak.
Well, as far as we're not under the federal acquisition regulations, so it's not that you guys are the bad guy, it's that you have this federal acquisition regulations that are in effect under contract for contracts, but they are not for grants. As far as the page process, though, we stick to the page proposals quite a bit. We recently instituted a check on sort of the font size that we have automating to make sure that you hit that, because that was one of the ones that was a little bit harder to do. But 15 pages is all you get. And, even our reviewers on the side will say, hey, if you're throwing in a YouTube link that has much more information, then I'm not going to look at it, because not every other company was allowed to have that YouTube link. So when it comes to the review process, it's about fairness and that every company gets the same footing to be able to convey the information. So we stick to that fairly strictly. Where we start getting, the ability to do different things and make different decisions is once the award's in place. Because we do know that these are fledgling ideas and that they may need to pivot, and what was in the original work plan and the proposal is likely to change as a result of that. And I think, Jason, you mentioned that that's possible if you can do some changes in the program too, as long as it's to still get to that end goal, which is the deliverable, right?
Yes, and that's fairly frequent. Once we get started, there may be, a change in requirements or, some other occurrence that happens us to shift gears a little bit. So yeah, we do change scope. I won't say a lot, but it does happen. So we will just ask the company to get in touch with the contracting officer and request a change and lay out, what the change is, what the cost effect is, what the performance effect is. And our technical folks will take a look at it, and if they concur and they agree with it and it still fits within the budget and the timeline and everything else that kind of dictates the contract, then we'll go ahead and authorize it. And that kind of touches on, I think Robin was talking about this a little bit earlier with the the built-in customer set. Everything that we do is directly tieable to the National Defense Strategy. So if the nation's priorities or the department's priorities change, it is possible for a built-in customer to kind of go away or a program to get canceled. I don't know if you see that very often on the grant side, but that does happen from time to time. It's not very often, but it can happen. But yeah, we do kind of line all of that up before we even publish the broad agency announcement. We know exactly where we want it to go, who the intended target is. Not to say that you can't have multiple targets. We'll just pick the one that we want, and that's what we're going to publish, and that's what we're going to work towards. But if the company is able to take a variant of whatever technology they developed for the Navy and modify it slightly to be commercially viable, then by all means, that's a huge bonus to the program, is that you can go sell it to Walmart if it doesn't happen to work out for us.
Thank you, Jason. I have a question with regards to the competitiveness for a business that's applying for either a grant or a contract. What does that look like with each of your agencies? And Robin, as a small business, how difficult do you think it is to get a grant versus there's a process of applying for a grant, but then, there's so many people probably applying that, sometimes people are not awarded. What's the likelihood that they'll be awarded the next time they apply? So you could talk a little bit about if someone is thinking about applying for a contract or a grant, what their chances are of being awarded. And in your opinion, what does a successful grant or contract look like?
That's for who's?
I guess for Jason or Ella, you can answer that. I mean, you've probably seen a lot of grants and gone through a lot of proposals and things. And is there something that stands out about a proposal that you say, well, this one is going to be funded and this one, they're not quite there yet. Maybe they, should wait.
I can talk a little bit about from our perspective. So, I mean, really what happens with NSF is, we have now gone quarterly, so we have a submission deadline every quarter. And at the end of that quarter, we basically batch the proposals into their portfolios, and then each program director looks and determines how they want to proceed with the review process. We have two ways of doing that. One is an ad hoc review, where we send out the proposals. We get at least 3 reviews per proposal. And so those reviews that come back are highly informative to us. They go to experts in the field that can evaluate that proposal. Others of us choose to do what we call as a panel review process, where we send out the proposal to 3 reviewers, and then it comes back and we all convene as reviewers and discuss the proposal in detail. And what's generated from that is a panel summary that describes, what is it that the reviewers thought were the strengths, weaknesses of the proposed work. And then it gets ranked in one of 3 categories, which is not competitive, competitive, and highly competitive. And so we have a funding rate of about 10% right now for phase 1s. And so ultimately what happens is if something is, competitive, and meets the criteria of the solicitation. So that's the other thing is we do have solicitation criteria. And one of the biggest ones is intellectual merit, which means that there's a technical innovation here that is high risk, high reward. We are looking to fund companies that after the phase 2 should be able to go on to either be revenue generating and self-sustaining, or they go and can raise money to commercialize the product into the market. And so we don't expect them to keep coming back. And it's not necessarily something that we look at. Oftentimes what ends up happening is anyone who comes back, the technology development is incremental and it doesn't meet the solicitation requirements of high risk, high reward. So that's the NSF in particular. I know that that's not the case for other ones because it's not as broad of a solicitation, meaning we accept any kind of technology all the way from education technologies to environmental technologies to advanced manufacturing. So I hope that touches a little bit on what you said, and I'm happy to let somebody kind of talk about their process.
Jason, can you talk about contracting? What is the kind of competitiveness of a company or multiple companies applying for the same contract? And what is it that you look for in a successful bid for a contract?
For success, it can be any number of things. I think probably the strongest factor is the feasibility of the technical approach, whether or not we think it's actually going to solve the solution or has the potential to solve the problem. We do have a little bit of flexibility, but most of it's, for us at least, is kind of budget driven, how many contracts we're able to award. In phase one, I'd say we're probably 15 to 20% of the companies that submit are successful. Phase two, it's a little bit better. I think we're probably getting up to in the 45 to 50% range for phase one companies moving on to phase two. During the phase one, actually even before that, I'll back up a little bit. When we're selecting a phase one, we have similar criteria to what Elizabeth just said, where we'll do, outstanding, satisfactory, marginal or unset. We just have an internal rule that anything that is marginal or below, we're not going to award to them. And we can award to anybody that is satisfactory or better, depending on budget and the technical evaluation team's recommendations. Sometimes we'll find ourselves in a situation where we have one proposal that we think is going to answer the call, like very specifically. They're going to do exactly what we want them to do, and they're going to solve the problem that we want them to do. And there may be another one that's not quite as, the potential for success isn't quite as high, but they have a really unique approach that if it were successful, it would be a game changer. So we may kind of internally rank them above somebody that has a more stable approach, just to kind of get a mix of, higher risk, higher reward with lower risk, and it'll answer the call. So that all kind of varies, but it does really tie, to the budget, since it's taxed on all of our R&D funds. We're limited by that. Outside of that, we can pretty much do whatever we'd like to as far as awards go.
Okay. One other question before we go into questions from the audience is, do you provide feedback to applicants that are applying either for a grant to NSF, Ella, or Jason, do you guys provide feedback to companies that maybe didn't receive the contract? Is that something that's part of the kind of evaluation process? And
we don't do it unsolicited, but if a company is unsuccessful and they would like a debrief report, we'll provide it. It's not as in-depth as they would probably like. It's just a kind of a summary of the evaluator's comments as far as strengths and weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So it's a fairly brief statement, but it can shed a little bit of light on where they may need to get a little bit of help for the next round.
We also, it's not unsolicited debrief, so it's when somebody requests a debrief, we do a 15-minute phone conversation and we go through any questions that they might have in that. There is no, we always state that this is not a re-review of the proposal. There will be no re-review. Once the final decision's been made, it's final. And so then the next steps would be to consider submitting another proposal to the program, and addressing all of the weaknesses that were really stated in the panel summary or the reviewer's comments.
Some of the agencies will provide the actual reviewer reports. For example, from DOE and I believe with NASA as well, we actually receive copies of the reviewer reports, typically 3 reviews per proposal. So those are distributed automatically.
Thank you, Robin. So Del, I think we have some questions in the chat box.
Yes, so we have a few questions. One of the ones that I know people were interested in, and this could actually speak to all 3 of our panelists. You know, when people are going after a grant or a contract, and just for any SBIR or STTR opportunity, kind of getting their objectives down, path forward, and knowing what they're going to do is very important. You know, in a DoD opportunity, when they look at the topic areas, their objectives are pretty laid out. It's something that they kind of have to follow. You know, this part of this question is for you, Jason. When you've seen people that have varied away from those objectives, how far can they vary away from those objectives before it would be seen as just non-competitive in the eyes of DoD?
For us, they can't vary too far away from what we're calling out in the BAA. It's laid out pretty clearly. It's very specific. And I know I mentioned this about a month ago when we met earlier, that if there's one bit of advice that I can give to companies that are trying to tap into this program, it's to just follow the directions. Read the BAA, you know, read any instructions that you're given, and just go through it once, go through it twice. Because the biggest issue I see for people not getting evaluated or not being successful is it's usually just simple mistakes, things that were easily preventable.
So, Ella, a slight shift on that question for you, since granting agencies kind of let people come up with their own objective and what they're going to do during that phase 1. In your eyes, when you've looked at these proposal packages, what do you think drives a really good objective, particularly for a phase 1? What do they need to be trying to do in order to be successful?
So, you know, meeting the reviewer criteria, which are written in our solicitation, is important. So to describe that a little bit more, you know, having a highly transformative technology, something that's really going to move the mark out there in the market. It cannot be just an incremental improvement. Systems engineering typically isn't receptive unless it's a very complex situation and it's an extremely novel approach to putting things together. Sometimes that falls into the advanced manufacturing portfolio category because we do a lot more of advanced manufacturing is much more applied. But then the second thing is, you know, really having outlined your milestones with quantitative success metrics. I always like to use this analogy of if you say you're going to deliver to me a table and then you deliver a table with 4 different leg lengths, does it work? So being able to really say, you know, we're choosing these specific success metrics because it's going to mean that our product's going to work. So phase 1 is all about de-risking the technical part of the technology. And then phase 2, we focus a lot more on, did you learn how you were going to really pivot this technology to a customer segment? And so we weight the commercialization plan heavily in phase 2. So because we're not going to be buying the technology and we won't be a source of revenue. You have to find where that source of revenue is going to be for your business. And then, if I'll give examples. We really like to see a well-balanced team. If you're going to really, propose that you're doing machine learning and you're going to have an unnamed person doing machine learning, but that's the technology. It's not, you should consider really having that expertise on your team and having identified somebody there. And oftentimes, you can tell because the proposal lacks details in the technology development area. So really have enough details and scientific rationale that leads the reviewers to believe that even though you haven't done this, everything that you are saying here that's has citations to support it, and backed up literature, gives the reviewers an idea of like, yeah, I can see this working, right? So we don't require preliminary data for a feasibility study, but we do require a very rigorous scientific rationale as to why what you're doing has the potential to work, right? So the first part of de-risking is making a good sound plan and telling people about it. Some companies do, they've already been a little bit further than the scientific rationale, and they'll provide some preliminary data, which speaks for itself, and that helps a little bit. So, but it's not a requirement in our proposal. And then I'm trying to think, and then it has the potential to really meet a market need. If you identify that, I'm going to ask for $1.75 million for the NSF, but my market's a $2 million a year market, that's not sustainable, right? Because really our program is funded through taxpayer dollars, and the idea is that we create businesses that create jobs that generate tax revenue, and then the whole cycle works together. So we really want to see that there's a market out there for it as well. And think broader impact. That's the other thing we do look at, broader impact. So, is this widget really just going to fix one tiny little problem in one little industry, or does it have, is it going to save money and save the environment? Is it going to, educate a lot of people? Are we going to be able to, through this project, have more, the opportunity for more people that have technical expertise in manufacturing? I only say this because my portfolio is manufacturing, but it's broad. So we're looking at broad and very impactful, broader societal benefits as well.
Okay. And kind of also a shift on the question to you, Robin, since you have been successful in getting both grant and contracting opportunities, just to highlight the variation between technical objectives. When you've had successful contracting opportunities, as Jason said, you hit the baseline, but have you ever gone beyond that baseline, and why? And then for any of the grants that you've had, what do you think makes a good technical objective? What have you seen when you're crafting your objectives for a winning proposal that has made it seem to stand out above everybody else?
Well, we haven't really had that many contracts. Most of the awards we've received have been in the grant category. So for the first part of the question, it's a little bit harder to answer. Yeah, not all projects end completely successfully and you take off and start generating large markets. It can take some time in either situation. Just one example, we had a contract or project that was several years ago now, and we kind of kept it alive bit by bit, and just recently received an order from a research institute in Germany, almost $700,000 for this little widget that we developed under a grant quite a few years ago. So it's not always immediate that you go straight from the project into commercialization and a market. Sometimes it can take a while. So we, even though we finished the project, we usually keep the work going to the extent that we can, and try to keep on marketing it until something clicks, like this happened recently. Let's see. For objectives, they're really driven by the topics in the solicitation. We're mostly looking at solicitations, SBIR, STTR, and the solicitation will be fairly clear about what they're looking for. So in crafting the objective, you want to put something together that will meet the requirements. I mean, the solicitation will state fairly clearly what it is that they're looking for. So your objective needs to meet that. And then based on your objective, you need to set up a work plan in order to meet those objectives. Basically, what you're trying to demonstrate in the project is feasibility of the work that you're proposing. So there usually may be more than one key technical objective, could be 2, 3. And then for each technical objective, there will be a number of tasks sorted with it to that you'll need to perform in order to meet the objective. So that's part of putting together a good work plan. Identify what the needs are and what your objective will be, what you need to do in order to meet those requirements, and then set up a work plan, step-by-step process, what you need to do in order to meet those particular technical objectives. If you spell that out very clearly so that a reviewer can follow through it and see the logical progression of the work, you might also put in some fallback plans. If this doesn't work, then we'll try this approach. So you try to cover multiple bases. Invariably, things don't necessarily pan out the way you expect, so it's good to have a fallback option that's in the plan that you can revert to if necessary. So yeah, I just need to think through the task very carefully. Make sure you captured everything you need to do in order to reach the technical objective.
Okay. We had another question come in, and this for mainly both you, Jason, and you, Ella. Somebody asked, is it possible to apply to stage 1 without a legal entity and then incorporate later if accepted? I know what the answer is, but I'd like to get further y'all's opinion on when you are looking at making an award to somebody and you look at that funding and how it's going into them, particularly when they're describing their company, their team, their business, what they want to do. Are there any hallmarks you look for about their particular structure, be it a sole proprietor, be it an LLC, or is it more that they actually have a plan for how to move forward and for how to grow?
For us, it's all about the technical approach. We have some companies that are, just under the 500 employee limit that have been, participating in the program for years, have had multiple awards, and then we also get the 2 or 3 people working out of somebody's garage. So the structure of the company itself is typically not much of a factor. It's more about what are their ideas and is it going to solve the problem that we have.
Yeah. And so it's about the review process and we evaluate. Now, of course, you have to do your SAM registrations and things like that. So there is a consideration. A lot of people will do an LLC, which is like the easiest filing that some people feel like to file for a company. We don't necessarily require that. Whatever you put into your SAM registration is going to have to sort of match what you move forward with. So there are certifications and registrations you have to do before you can submit to the proposal. It takes about submit a proposal. It takes about 30 days for those to come through, and they're in government systems that we don't have any control over. You have to get a DUNS number, things like that. And so one thing that you consider is if you're going to name it, Ella Marowski is the company, and then you go forward and do all of these, then there's the pain of having to go back and re-establish all of those. And all the paperwork administrative paperwork it takes to do that. So, that's something to keep in mind. It's free to get a federal tax ID number. It's free to get a DUNS number if you're applying to a grant or a contract. So I oftentimes recommend people reach out to their SBDC to help with those things and guide them there. That's a good resource. So.
And then from your side, Robin, for the first year you had it already incorporated as well as operating under a sole? Kind of what was your for your first win?
Yeah, actually, I did form the company right from the very beginning. LLC is fairly straightforward and easy to set up, so I don't think there was even that much of an expense to do that. It was all pretty straightforward. So having some legal entity, I mean, seems like a good thing to do to get started. And so when I applied for 2 SBIRs through NASA at the very beginning, and that's how we got started. Those ran through the company at that point, and kept the same structure ever since. Just changed for tax purposes the way the company is organized, but other than that, we're still an LLC.
Okay, great. Well, I think that is going to end our Q&A, and we're right up at our time. So, thank you, Myrriah, and thank you, Ella, Robin, and Jason. Also, thank you, Debra, for trying to be with us. Unfortunately, she was having some computer issues, but if you do have questions about DCAA, about compliance, about regulations, let us know and we will try and get those answered from Debra. But again, I want to thank all of our panelists for this really great panel. But we're about to shift over now. So as mentioned at the beginning of the event today, we're going to do a networking session. So if you head over to the networking tab, it'll allow you to join a queue to meet with other attendees, talk about how you could possibly work together, how you could collaborate, and how you can help each other grow. So feel free to connect with those people you meet, as it'll share their information with you so that y'all can remain in contact afterwards. That is going to go on for about 20 minutes, and then we'll be back with a presentation from DoD representatives who are going to talk about their offices, some unique opportunities they have, and then how they procure new and innovative products from the business community. But want to say thank you again to our panelists. We greatly appreciate you being able to be here for our Innovation Summit and for kind of diving down into what are those differences between grants and contracts, what drives it, and what is important for people to know. So thank you all again. And now everybody, head over to the networking for some really great opportunities to meet your fellow attendees.